think that we're talking about combining it with Urban Academic Village. So we have the Earth Month, we have School of Public Affairs event, so this is really a fantastic opportunity for me to share. Again, I want to welcome our visitors to the School of Public Affairs at Texas Southern University. Environmental justice in the 21st century. What I wanted to do is to give an overview of what environmental justice is for those of you who may not be familiar with the term and who may not be environmentalists. But I always ask my students when I used to teach. Professor Rudley doesn't want any of his deans teaching, but I'm a very good teacher. But I would always ask my students, first day of class, if it's an environmental policy class, how many of you are environmentalists? And so I'll do that now. How many of you are environmentalists? Raise your hand. And invariably, we would get very few hands raised. Then I would say it's all about framing. How you frame a question will oftentimes determine what answer you get. Let me reframe. How many of you drink water? How many of you are concerned about what's in the water? How many of you eat food? How many of you are concerned about what's in the food? How many of you breathe air? How many of you are concerned about what's in the air? If you answered yes to 2 out of 3, you are an environmentalist. You just don't know it. So when we talk about the environment is everything. And what I've tried to do over the last 30 years is to reframe what environment is and what environmentalism is, and to make context out of this whole notion of environmental justice. When you put environment and justice together, you have a very powerful message and a powerful movement. I like to write books. One of my heroes is W.E.B. Du Bois. When I left TSU, I didn't go straight to Atlanta. I took a detour to a place called Los Angeles, California. I stayed out in California and I left LA in '94 and went to Atlanta. And I left Atlanta in 2011. But my first job out of graduate school was at TSU. So TSU basically gave me my start and was the launching pad for the work that I've been doing for the last 30 years. If you look at the books that I've written, they deal with housing, transportation, community economic development, deal with health, deal with planning, land use, industrial facility siting, air quality, all those things that we often take for granted. It's actually 18 books. But it's only one book. But don't tell anybody. The central theme is about justice, fairness, and equity. Justice, fairness, and equity. That has been the foundation for my work. And as I said, one of my heroes is W.B. Du Bois. When I left UCLA, I went to Atlanta. I went to Clark Atlanta University. My alma mater is Atlanta University. They changed the name to Merger School, Clark College and Atlanta University in 1988. But Du Bois founded the sociology department, where I got my master's degree from. And I wanted to model my career after this hero, after this scholar, after this activist, after this researcher, after this writer, after this policy analyst. And so these books are just, you know, the ingredients of how I see getting information in the hands, correct information, and timely information in the hands of the right people, whether they be elected officials or policymakers or community folks. And so, as I go through my presentation, I'll try to, you know, make all these things connect. It's about connecting the dots, and I'm very good about connecting dots. I tell people I'm very good at what I do. Not arrogant, but if you have been well trained to do the kind of work that you do, you have no fear about going up against any Goliath. Because I tell people, you know, if you're a man and you put your pants on one leg at a time like I do, then we can do battle. So connecting the dots is a big part of what environmental justice is all about, and environmental justice research is all about. Defining the environment is everything. It's where we live, work, play, learn, worship, as well as the physical and natural world. The environment is in this room. It's also out there. The environment is in the hinterlands. It's in the green spaces. It's in our schools, in our parks, in our neighborhoods. And so when we talk about environmental justice, we're not just talking about birds, whales, ducks, wetlands. These things are very important. But humans are also part of the ecosystem and the environment. We are not the most important part, but we are, for a fact, the most destructive part. So when we talk about this environmental piece, I want to be clear that humans are not the center. That has been the problem for thousands of years. And so when we talk about this whole question of defining the environment, and we talk about the principles of environmental justice, environmental justice embraces the principle that all people and communities are entitled to equal protection of environmental laws, housing, transportation, health. These are human rights issues. These are civil rights issues. No one, government or industry, has the right to kill you, whether swiftly like a bullet to the head or slowly by breathing pollution. That's a basic right that we're talking about. We're talking human rights. It has been elevated beyond civil rights. These are universal rights, the rights to breathe clean air, drink clean water, and to have food that is nurturing and sustainable. 1968, Dr. King went to Memphis, Tennessee on an environmental justice mission, striking garbage workers. If you don't think garbage is environment, you let the garbage workers go on strike. They had to call out the National Guard, and they did. Dr. King did not make it out of Memphis, Tennessee in 1968. He was assassinated. He was killed April 4th. And so when we talk about environment and justice, 10 years later, I got thrust into an environmental justice issue. 10 years after King was killed, 68, 78. Here in Houston, 2 years out of graduate school. I came to Houston and Texas Southern University in 1976. 2 years. You don't get tenure 2 years. Anyway. So I was untenured assistant professor in the Department of Sociology at TSU, and I was asked by my wife to collect data for a lawsuit that she had filed, that she had sued the state of Texas, my employer. She had sued the city of Houston, Harris County, and this company, I won't call her name, but the initials are BFI, headquartered here in Houston. And so she needed someone to collect data for this lawsuit, and I got drafted into it. It was not something I volunteered for. This is not something I was trained for. This was 1978, 1979. I had 10 graduate students in our research methods class in sociology, 10 graduate students. And we basically developed, designed, and put in place research protocols for doing environmental justice studies. I did the study in 1979 and got it published in Sociological Inquiry in 1983. So Bean versus Southwestern Waste Management Corporation was the first environmental racism lawsuit that used civil rights law to challenge it. So it's a famous case. It's like the Brown versus Board of Education when it comes to education. This was the first environmental racism lawsuit. There were protests, and this is in Northwood Manor, Northeast Houston. The gentleman that has his back turned and on a megaphone is none other than our congressman from Houston, Al Green. But at the time, he was a justice of the peace. He was a fighter way back then also. And so when we talk about this whole issue of environmental justice, Bean versus Southwest Waste Management Corporation was the first lawsuit. It basically said, Houston, you do not have the right to just dump on black communities. Houston didn't have zoning then, it doesn't have zoning now. And what we found is that the city of Houston historically had placed landfills in predominantly black communities. Now when I say predominantly black, that's like me saying my family is predominantly black. These are all black neighborhoods. Sunnyside, City Gas, Northwood Manor, Cashmere Garden, Trinity Garden, Acres Home. So you notice some of these neighborhoods? These same neighborhoods today, like Sunnyside and Acres Home, still have illegal dumping. Because people knew, historical memory, that that's where garbage used to be dumped. And so even though the landfill's not there anymore, people still dump. Check this out. The name of the landfill was Whispering Pines. Sanitary landfill. Whispering Pines sounds like a subdivision, huh? I want to live. Where do you live? I live in Whispering Pines. It's not. Well, we found that 5 out of 5 of the city-owned landfills in Houston were located in predominantly black neighborhoods. 6 out of 8 of the city-owned incinerators. And 3 out of 4 of the privately owned landfills were located in predominantly black neighborhoods. 82% of all the garbage dumped in Houston was dumped in black neighborhoods. This was from the 20s up until 1978. 82% of the garbage. Blacks only made up 25% of the population. Now, we were getting 80. If black folks were getting 85 or 82% of the contracts, the dollars, the good schools, the libraries, all the good stuff, what planners call amenities, but we're not. We're getting the bad stuff. Locally unwanted land uses or lulus. Birth of a movement. This was 1978. That wasn't no national movement. This was just an isolated case. The movement was not born until 1982, 1983, when the state of North Carolina decided to scoop up some contaminated dirt along the freeways and highways and take it somewhere. And that somewhere was in the black community in North Carolina. North Carolina has 100 counties, and they decided to go through this rigorous scientific process of selecting where it should go. The only science involved was not hydrology, toxicology, epidemiology. It was sociology and political science. Who gets what, when, and why? They found Warren County, one of the poorest counties and one of the blackest counties in the state, and say, you get this toxic waste dumped. And people said, no, this is not right. And Ben Chavis, who was the executive director of the United Church of Christ Commission for Racial Justice, basically led that charge and said, no, this is environmental racism. These are young kids lining the street, putting their bodies. These are students, high school students, putting their bodies in the way of these dump trucks that are getting ready to dump toxic waste. Toxic is nothing more than a nice way of saying poison. Something is toxic. It's poison in the community. And so the United Church of Christ in 1987 did this report, the first national study to document this pattern that's happening across the country. It was not just Houston. It was all across the country. Toxic waste and race, 1987. And what they found is that race was the most potent variable to predict where these hazardous waste facilities are located. It was not income, it was not poverty, it was not property values, home ownership, it was race. It was environmental racism. And they released a report in 1987 and they distributed the study. This is the photograph that was taken of these young kids. And I said, oh, this is such a great photograph, this should be on a book. And Dumping in Dixie came after the 1987 Toxic Waste and Race report. And what I did in Dumping in Dixie was to try to say, look, there's something unique about the South, the Southern United States, that makes it so unique that something is going on that we need to document. We need to really just find out what's going on. The Deep South has a legacy of Jim Crow segregation, resistance to civil rights and equal protection. The South, it is not by accident that the Southern United States is the most defiled and most polluted region of the country, with this mentality of bring it on down. We'll take the jobs and the poison and the pollution. Anything goes. That mentality has turned our region into the dumping grounds for the rest of the country. And so when we talk about environmental justice, we talk about these principles, and we talk about the fact that people are called basically were not part of the national environmental movement. The environmental movement historically was very segregated, just like the rest of the country. And it was not until the 60s, the late 60s, that some of the organizations, I'm not going to call their names because they're French now, they have converted. They have started to color coordinate their action. But then, black people could not even join some of these organizations. They were not concerned about our issues. They were more concerned about birds than about black people, or Hispanics, or Asians, or Native Americans, or poor whites for that matter. It was basically middle income, leisure type organizations, dealt with the environment, but in a very sense absence of social justice and equity. And so Ben Chavis with the United Church of Christ Commission on Racial Justice in 1991 organized this summit, and basically people of color came together with this whole principle that we speak for ourselves. And if we have the resources, we can do for ourselves. We don't need anybody riding in on a white horse and saving us. We can save ourselves. We can do it for ourselves. And so we had the summit in 1991, and the impetus for this summit was a growing body of research, academics, a few of us who were working and writing and working with communities and testifying in courts and doing all kinds of work, community-driven grassroots organizations doing it for themselves. In some cases, they will call us who were at universities to work with them, not leave them. They led themselves to work with them, to provide technical support when they needed it. And so the first 4 days, it was a 4-day summit, and the first 2 days were people of color, just us in the room. African Americans, Latinos, Native American, Asian, and Pacific Islanders. We had to be in the room by ourselves because when white people come in the room, if you have not gotten yourself together, it changes. And so we had to unpack our baggage of slavery and imperialism and all these other isms, so that black people get to know Native Americans. Native Americans get to know Asians. Asians get to know Latinos. And so we started to unpack those stereotypes that we have with each other, people of color have of each other. And then the second 2 days, we said, now we have to be open. We have to let everybody in. And we have to be understanding that we have to address the issue of justice. The issue of justice. The people, poor white people in Appalachia are getting dumped on. Mountaintop removal, water is contaminated. And so when we talk about the issues, we say we're going to make this a big tent. We developed 17 principles of environmental justice, and those principles are as relevant today as they were back in 1991. What was the government's response? After all of that organizing and coming together and groups springboarding their activities and challenging state government and county government and city government, challenging industries that would turn their communities into landfills and garbage dumps and all kinds of polluting facilities, people said no, that we have a right. Just because we don't have a lot of money doesn't mean that we don't have a voice to say what we want our community to be. And so we were at a conference in Washington, D.C. in February 1991, and a few of us got a call to come to the White House. When I got the call, I thought it was a joke. I said, what? For what? But we got invited to the White House for the signing, this is February 1994, of the Executive Order on Environmental Justice. And when you go into the Oval Office, nice office, by the way, nice desk. And that's President Clinton there signing the Executive Order on Environmental Justice 1994. Over the last 3 decades, we've got change, we've made progress. We still have a long way to go. In 1990, when I did the People of Color Directory in 1992, there were about 300 people of color organizations working on environmental issues. Today, there are more than 3,000 working on these issues across the U.S. The environmental justice movement is a global movement. In 1990, Dumping and Dixie was the only book on environmental justice. When I wrote the book, I didn't write it as a textbook. As a matter of fact, Dr. Glenn Johnson, who is my associate dean of research and graduate studies. He was my research assistant when I was at University of Tennessee for a year on that book. And I left Tennessee and went to California. But anyway, Dumping in Dixie was the only book. When I wrote it, it was about 180-page book, and Westview Press sold it for like $30. And I was like, wow! But it got adopted as a textbook all across the country. And when I got my first royalty check, it was, as the kids would say, it was fat with a PHAT. But that's not what I wrote it. I wrote it to get in the hands of ordinary people to challenge what's going on. Dumping in Dixie dealt with the Houston case study of all the landfills. It dealt with Dallas. The lead smells was in Dallas. For some reason, it's either the hydrology or the toxicology, epidemiology. All the lead smells in Dallas are located where people of color located. Now, it's something about that seems rather strange. We just studied, one of the case studies dealt with Cancer Alley in Louisiana. Another case study dealt with Alabama, Emelle, Alabama, in Sumter County. The nation's largest hazardous waste landfill just happened to be in a town that was 75% black and a community that was 90% black. They imported waste from all 48 states and at least, half dozen foreign countries. I even went to West Virginia and found a company that was in a community that manufactured the same chemical that killed all those people in Bhopal, India. Methyl isocyanate, MIC. It was the only place that manufactured. The plant that was located in Institute, West Virginia, was a prototype for the plant that was located in Bhopal, India. For some reason, the company found black people in West Virginia. A lot of people don't even know there were black people in West Virginia. This company found them. They've been there a long time. The plant is located next to West Virginia State College, which used to be West Virginia Colored Institute. It was the black school that West Virginia needed a place to build a Jim Crow school, so they built it in 1880. The company came in there in the 50s. And we can see who came first, chicken and egg kind of thing. So when we talk about these issues, we get our facts. In 1990, there was not a single university that had a environmental justice center. And it was not by accident that the first 4 centers that were set up in the U.S. were located at HBCUs, historically black colleges and universities. There are today more than a dozen university-based centers. There are 22 legal clinics that work on environmental justice issues. And there are 6 academic programs that offer degrees in environmental justice, including a PhD program at the University of Michigan, the only school in the country that offers a PhD in environmental justice. Environmental justice work is now getting recognized. Long ago, what we did, some people said, well, that's not sociology. That's not really legitimate work. You need to start working on real environmental issues, wetlands, air quality. You need to deal with conservation. We said we deal with people and kids who are being poisoned by lead in housing. That's environmental justice, that's health. And so it has taken from 1990, well, it's taken a while for these issues to get recognized, from the 70s up until 1990. Between 1990 and 2013, more than 24 environmental justice leaders have won national and international awards, including the Heinz Award, MacArthur Prize, Goldman Prize, Ford Foundation Leadership Changing World Awards, Robert Wood Johnson Community Health Leaders. And the last 3 years, the Goldman Prize, which is like a Pulitzer in the environment, the last 3 years we've had environmental justice leaders to win this prize. This is a prize that's awarded to the winner $150,000. So it's more than a piece of paper. It's a piece of paper and a check. The 2011 winner was Hilton Kelly, who is from Port Arthur, who got his award for working, around these issues around the refineries. In 2012, it was Carolyn Cannon, who is from Alaska, dealing with issues around climate change in the Arctic in Alaska. And just last week, in 2013, Kim Wasserman from Chicago won the Goldman Prize for her work around coal-fired power plants in Chicago. Belgian pollution, and she fought with the organization, was able to close it down. So when we talk about the response of government and what the states are doing, for example, in 1990, there was not a single state that had an environmental justice law or an executive order or policy. And New Hampshire in 1993 became the first state. We don't know why New Hampshire. You know, New Hampshire like to be first in a lot of things. Like it's first in primaries, right? We were the first state to pass an environmental justice law. In 2007, there were 41 states that had environmental justice policy, a law, or an executive order. And today, all 50 states have some type of environmental justice law, policy, or an executive order. However, much work still needs to be done. And again, this whole idea of how do we create healthy places and healthy people? You can have laws and you can have regulations, but they're only good as they are enforced. And we know that where people live can impact your health. And the most important predictor of health is zip code or your neighborhood. I can ask you your zip code and determine, without even doing a whole lot of research, what the health indicators are for that particular area. And so when we talk about this whole idea, the people who have the poorest people in the country also live in the most compromised environment when it comes to pollution. And so when we talk about this whole question of place and race still matter. And so when we talk about these issues of vulnerability, there are levels of vulnerability because of income, race, geographic location, political power. All those things impact vulnerability. There are more than 100 studies that link racism to reduced health. Racism can make you sick. And so there are more than 200 studies that link race to class, environmental studies that link race and class disparities. So I'm going to go back to this southern inequality and look at the southern phenomena of why is it that the southern United States is so different. And I'm including Texas. Texas is southern. It's southwest, but it's southern. And so when we talk about these issues, and it is no accident that when you start mapping vulnerability, the southern United States will stick out like a sore thumb. We know that there are all kinds of belts. Like we're in the Sun Belt. You heard that term, right? Sun Belt. We're in the Bible Belt. So there is a poverty belt. There's an uninsured belt, black belt, fat belt. Oh, I should say obesity belt. There's a diabetes belt, stroke belt, and pollution belt. I'm going to go through some of these belts with you. If you look at this map, it shows you where people of color are concentrated, minority population. And the heavy blue shaded area represents where people of color are concentrated. And so you can see that swath of land located, you know, south, mid-Atlantic, Gulf Coast, southwest, going across, heavy blue. If you look at where Hispanic population is located, Latino population, heavy percent in certain geographic areas. That heavy red shaded area from Texas going all the way across southwest of California, Arizona, etc., and South Florida, and some of the areas in northeast, the New Jersey, Pennsylvania, New York corridor. This is where African American population is located. Heavy concentration in the old historic Black Belt, southeast, going across from parts of Virginia and Pennsylvania and South Carolina, North Carolina, Georgia, Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, Florida, going across Texas. And so if we start layering these vulnerabilities, maps of vulnerability, and keep in mind what you're seeing is something that has been mapped statistically as well as spatially, and you can see. In 1990, this country was very different than it is today, and it will be very different 27 years from now. And you can see the percent people of color concentrated in those very geographic areas that I'm talking about. These are areas of vulnerability when you start overlaying different kinds of poverty, pollution, uninsured, vulnerability in terms of risk to from natural disasters, etc. You're going to start seeing some real patterns shake out. This is 1990. This is what it looked like in 2040. In 2040 and 2042, the population in this country, or the U.S., will dramatically shift. It's predicted that by 2042, the United States will have a majority of people of color. Whites will be in the minority. But in terms of spatial location of the people of color majority, it's very predictable where it'll be. The heavy, dark shaded areas. Look at the bright yellow or the light or the white area. You'll see that's where the white people are. And so, look at the poverty belt. Heavy blue, dark blue area. That's the poverty belt. I saw a pointer. Yes. The heavy blue area represents the poverty belt. High concentration of poverty. If you look at the electoral map, in this case, red is Republican and blue, Democrat. Keep this map. Look at the heavy concentration. The 10 healthiest states in the country. Now, blue, remember I saw that map, the red states, politically, but in terms of unhealthy, is blue. So there's a correlation between health and politics. I'm not saying voting Republican will make you sick. But look at the 10 healthiest states: Vermont, Hawaii, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Minnesota, Connecticut, Utah, New Jersey, Maine, Rhode Island. Look at the conspicuous absence of a region, not a southern state up there. Now, if you look at the unhealthiest states, it's not by accident there are two states, Mississippi and Florida. I'm sorry, Mississippi and Louisiana fight each year as to who's going to be on the bottom. And so you find this heavy concentration of southern states. 7 out of 10 of the states that's labeled unhealthy are in the South. Now, this is not my data. This is done by Forbes. Uninsured belt. Again, heavy green represents the high concentration of people who don't have insurance. High concentration of people in the South don't have insurance. High poverty in the South. High level of areas that's unhealthy in the South. Look at the people who are fighting Obamacare. The dark states. They filed a lawsuit. They lost. 21 states filed a lawsuit saying Obamacare is unconstitutional. When I presented some of this data in Bogota, Colombia the other day, a few days ago, people asked me, well, why would anybody fight national health insurance? I couldn't explain that. But anyway, they did, and they lost. Look at the states that continue to fight Medicaid expansion. The orange. These are the southern states. You're fighting Medicaid, you're fighting national health insurance, you're least likely to have insurance in the region, you're sicker, you're poorer, you got more pollution. I'm going to show you all these things now. There's a stroke belt. This heavy area right in here. It's not showing good up on here, but the dark shaded area is considered areas that have high concentration of people who die from stroke or who have strokes. That's a stroke belt. Southern. Pollution belt. This is from American Lung Association. It's not really showing good. I don't know what's going on. But anyway, the bigger the dot in Texas, the bigger the dot, the more the pollution. There's a heavy concentration. Fast food belt. Look at the high concentration of fast food. So we're eating, not eating right. There is an obesity belt. Well, let's see a fat belt. What do I want? Look at this states. Dark areas represent areas that have the highest concentration of people who are obese. Look what's the most obese state. Mississippi. Look at the state that has that's the skinniest. Colorado. Mountain High. fresh air, bean sprouts, tofu. Anyway, look at these states that are obese. Here's a belt where there's food desert belt and carless belt. No cars. Look at the concentration. If you don't have a car and there's no supermarket in your neighborhood, what do? You're more likely to buy what's there and end up having health problems, obesity, diabetes, strokes. You start naming all those things. This is the built environment impact on health. This is the social determinants of health. We just studied, we updated the 1987 Toxic Waste and Race Report, and we found that was done by the United Church of Christ. Myself, Dr. Paul Mohai, Dr. Beverly Wright, Paul Mohai, University of Michigan, Beverly Wright of Dillard University, and Robin Saha from the University of Montana. We did the study for the United Church of Christ, and what we found is that 56% of the people who live within a 2-mile radius of the nation's hazardous waste facilities are people of color. 56%. Now, people of color only represent about 34–35% of the U.S. population. When you look at the clustering effect, that is 2 or more facilities, clusters, that number jumps to 69%. Almost 7 out of 10 residents who live around clustered facilities are people of color. That's African Americans, Latinos, Asian and Pacific Islanders, and Native Americans. So when we talk about these issues, environmental issues and justice, we're not just talking about landfills and incinerators and petrochemical plants, etc. We're also talking about the impact on the global situation, climate change. And the fact that climate change is probably the most important environmental justice issue of the 21st century. Because we're not just talking about neighborhoods, we're talking about the planet. And it's unfortunately the people that produce the least amount of carbon, that have the smallest carbon footprint, are the ones that are hit hardest. They're hit first and worst and longest. And so when we talk about the question of how we address climate change and deal with it from mitigation and mediation, then we have to deal with adaptation. We have to deal with this whole issue of justice. And so we have to come up with policies, and the environmental justice frame basically said that we have to put equity into any policy formulation. And we have to, if we protect the most vulnerable, then we protect us all. If we protect children and make standards to protect the children, we protect all of us. If we protect the most vulnerable community in New Orleans, Lower Ninth, then you protect everybody. When you don't protect the most vulnerable, you place everybody at risk. You place everybody at risk. And so when we talk about these issues of climate change and severe weather events, and we talk about what happens, who gets left behind, who got washed away, city underwater, and this whole question of waiting for the government. Long before Hurricane Katrina, white people learned that if you wait for the government, that can be hazardous to your health. Now, white people learned that too after Katrina, because when the storm hit and the levees breached, there was no dictating whether you are black, Hispanic, or white. You got washed away. And so when we talk about these issues of justice, fairness, and equity, we talk about natural disasters occurring more frequent. From 1980 to 2011, these numbers, from 3 to 5 times greater occurring in frequency. In 1980, there were 50 occurrences, disasters. By 2011, there were 171. So we talk about these events, we talk about the curve, we talk about the location, the geography of disasters. Look at the red dots, represent major disasters that have hit along the Gulf Coast and the South Atlantic and Mid-Atlantic. Big storms, not just here in the South anymore, but have gone all the way up to New York, as we talk about Sandy And the biggest concentration of where these areas are is you can look at this whole corridor in terms of vulnerability. The people who don't have a lot of resources, the people who have been locked out of the economic system, who don't have bank accounts and cars, and who don't have a lot of resources to pull them back in the recovery phase, that's vulnerability. Cost of disasters are going up, and if you look at the fact that the United States alone accounted for 90% of all the world disasters in 2012, 90%. So we're getting hit hard. And so when we talk about these issues, dark areas are the most vulnerable to climate change. In the dark areas. Many of people, call poor people, live in these dark areas. When you talk about the green areas, shaded green, dark green, represent the most vulnerable to drought. Right now we're having floods, and at the same time we're having droughts, heat waves. Most vulnerable to flooding. Look at some of these cities where it is mapped. This is a Oxfam study that was done in 2013. Some of the places like Baton Rouge, Little Rock, Montgomery, Alabama, Tallahassee, Columbia, Atlanta, Nashville. These are places that are vulnerable to flooding. High sea level rise. You're talking Baton Rouge, talking South Florida, on the east seacoast. Climate change will also impact health, and when we talk about health, we talk about tremendous impact when we talk about global climate change and how much health care costs will rise and illnesses also will rise. Here's a map of the cumulative heat vulnerability index. These are where people will experience heat waves, and oftentimes there will be resulting deaths predicted. And if you look at the heavy shaded areas, these are major metropolitan areas, and oftentimes the people that are most vulnerable, elderly people who are on fixed income, do not want to run their air conditioning. They get a Social Security check, and then you could spend all your check on electricity bill. So they are in those rooms, in those houses, apartments, and they suffer, and many die. And so what the country is now embarking on and talking about is going green, but I think it's more talk than walk. When we talk about and look at the 10 greenest U.S. cities, this is a study done by Ken Portney, who did this study in 2011, looking at the top 10 greenest U.S. cities. Look at the cities. I'm sorry, states. Greenest states: Vermont, Maine, New Hampshire. Green. Look at these same states. Those were a high correlation with the healthiest states. There's a correlation between going green or green, doing it real, and health. Green also means tree cover. I mean, if you can look at outdoor inequality, this was a study that was done in 2012 by Tim DeChamp, and it looked at where trees are and where trees are not, and looked at the correlation between who lives there. Now, this is a study that was done, but we all know in some of our neighborhoods, it used to be a saying that trees don't burn together. But this is real. This is in Oakland, and this is over in Piedmont, and this is West Oakland. West Oakland is mostly, working class poor. Folks with money got trees. Over here, they don't. This is Houston. River Oaks. What? Look who got the trees. This is Boston. This is West Cambridge. This is Somerville. You can look at income, but you can also overlay race. This is Chicago. This is Hyde Park. This is Woodlawn. I think this is President Obama's neighborhood, if I'm not mistaken. Anyway, and this is San Francisco. San Francisco Wood, Hunters Point, Bayview Hunters Point. This is the only remaining last black neighborhood in San Francisco. No trees. And when the white people move in there and they gentrify, they're going to get some trees. They have a tree planting, all that. So trees correlate. And we want all of our communities to have green. We want our kids to have parks, playgrounds. We want our parks to be safe. But some of our parks are located. This is a picture I took in Camden, New Jersey, where I was working on a case with community groups that were fighting this cement plant. They built a cement plant right across from the park. Kids out here, they play, and they put it out there for a while and cover it with dust. Trucks running in and out. You don't want to park next to a cement plant. This is a park in Norfolk, Louisiana, located sandwiched between two refineries. You stand there 5 minutes, you get a headache. It smells like somebody's pumping gas on the ground. This is a park located across from, sandwiched between two refineries. So how can we go green? And in this case, green represents states that have mandated renewables. In other words, states that we're going to go to clean energy and we're going to try to get off of some of this dirty energy and go green. Now, look at where the green is, and look at where the white is. White is you don't have a renewable mandate. White is bad. That's not racial. But green is good. Look at the southern states. Texas got a renewable. But look at Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia. They say we're not doing green. We're going to stay on the nasty. And so look at the states that are energy efficient. The more energy efficient states, look at the places. California, Oregon, London. Look at the states. The dark areas down here, they are less energy efficient. We still talk about going green, but we're still mostly using electricity and transportation for our energy. That's about almost 68%. So if we can get off the fossil fuel as it relates to use on transportation, greener, and go to greener electricity, we would be more than halfway there. But right now, we only got 12% of our energy that's being produced with renewables. And so, where's the dirty stuff? Where's the dirty energy being produced? If you look at this chart, living within 30 miles of a power plant, the distance with which the most airborne pollutants impact occur. 56% of whites, 78% of blacks, 39% of Latinos live within 30 miles. White people are more likely to live near a power plant than anybody. Now, we don't know why. Yes, we do. And so when we talk about these issues, living near a power plant is not something that you would fight to do. There's no long line to live next to a power plant. So living on the fence line means a lot of problems for power plants. The heavy shaded areas, the purple areas, the red areas, those are the hot spots. There are more than 23,000 excess deaths due to air pollution from power plants. The heavy dots, the areas where there's high concentration of coal-fired power plants, that's where the big problems are. In many places, the hot spots are where people of color live. And so when you talk about some people are located physically on the wrong side of the tracks, as a matter of fact, African Americans are 79% more likely to live in neighborhoods where there's a health threat from pollution. And this is true in 19 states for African Americans, and 12 states for Hispanics, and 7 states for Asians. Some people, well, it's just poor people. No, it's not a poverty thing. African Americans who make $50,000 or $60,000 are more likely to live in neighborhoods that's more polluted than white people who make $10,000. This was a study that was done by 2 professors at the University of Colorado. And so when we talk about the vulnerable, we talk about the most vulnerable, children. We talk about asthma being rampant. We talk about the fact that in some cases kids are learning to use asthma apparatuses sooner than they can hold a bottle. And so when we talk about these issues, and the question is, do we have a right to breathe versus companies have a right to pollute? And the right to pollute is nothing more than a permit. You get a permit from the state or the federal government to pollute. And so you have these contradictions. And so when we talk about going green with cars, we talk about plug-ins, we talk about Prius, green car. There's no such thing as a green Humvee. And so when we talk about cars, we know cars give us liberty. They give us, a chance to move around. They give us mobility, but they also give us something else. They give us air pollution. Car ownership is almost universal in the country, but there's a population that really is disproportionately carless. African Americans are more likely not to own a car. And so if you talk about this whole question of only 7% of whites and 24% of blacks don't own cars, 17% of Latinos and 13% of Asians. Almost half of black people in Pittsburgh don't own a car. 34%, almost 35% of black people in New Orleans didn't own a car when Katrina hit. A lot of people say, why don't we just get in the SUVs and drive out? Get in the Lexus lane and go and drive out. Well, if you don't have a car, it's kind of hard to escape and leave when the buses are underwater. And so transportation-induced pollution is a big problem in most of our major cities. And the pollution that's coming out of the tailpipe is not health enhancing. It creates lots of problems. Many diesel trucks and buses create lots of problems. And there are more than 125,000 cancer deaths due to diesel each year. And so we talk about cleaning up and going green and having green transit. It's a lot of talk because still only about 5% of the American public use transit to get around. However, African Americans are almost 6 times more likely to use transit to get around than the rest of the population. We live in cities and we're more dependent on buses and trains, and so we are more likely to support, but public transit is losing in many ways. And so we know that having better transit and can get people out of cars, it can clean up the environment. For example, in the 1996 Olympics, when we couldn't drive our car, I was living in Atlanta, we had to ride MARTA. And there was a reduced automobile use by 22%, and the admissions to emergency room will decline by almost 42%. Cleaner the air, the kids are not having, asthma episodes. Everybody for 2 weeks lived better because of not being able to get in our cars and drive everywhere. Most of us had to take the train. There's an imbalance between how transportation dollars are being spent. 80% of the transportation dollars still go to building roads, 20% to transit. That needs to change. We have policies and programs in states where you can only use transportation dollars to build roads. You can't divert any money to transit. That's idiotic. That's crazy. For every dollar invested in public transit, it generates $4 in return in economic activity. For every $1 billion invested in public transportation infrastructure, it supports approximately $36,000. So public transportation makes a lot of sense, dollars and economic and otherwise. So greening public transportation makes a lot of sense when it comes to getting people to jobs, cleaning up the air, getting access to mobility. But again, we were in this build them and they will come. You build a 40-lane highway, it'll fill up with cars. And so you can't get out of this mess. The price of gasoline goes up, transit goes up. But the fact is, gasoline goes down, transit ridership goes down. Transportation is the second most expensive household item, just behind income. Just behind household housing budget. So you got housing costs, and then you have transportation as a second. So when we talk about these issues, building roads, let me back up. So we build these roads to nowhere, and the fact is that we can't get out of it. And so this is a disaster. But it's not just a disaster. In 2 days, we'll have the 3rd anniversary of BP spill. And this whole notion that this was a fluke, the fact is that there will be more spills. And the fact that all the attention was placed on the cleanup, stopping the leak, and getting the people in, who lost their jobs, getting them back to work. But very little attention was placed on where the waste is going. And so when we met with Unified Command, and we asked the question, where's all that waste that's getting cleaned up going? And they say it's going to landfills. We said, where are the landfills? Well, as it turns out, when I went back to the office, we did our GIS analysis. We looked at all the landfills, looked at those 9 landfills, looked at where the waste was going. And we found that in those counties along the Gulf Coast, people of color only make up 26% of the population in those coastal counties in Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, and Florida. However, 60% of the waste that's getting cleaned up, that got cleaned up, went to mostly black communities. So you're getting 60% of the waste. But in terms of the contracts, less than 1/10 of 1% of the contracts went to black people. Another case of getting dumped on after disaster. If there's another disaster that will occur in the Gulf, the waste will still go to those landfills because the landfills are located in mostly African American communities where the garbage goes. So this toxic waste from this cleanup, this oil, went to landfills that were designed for household garbage, where you throw bananas. But there's a difference between waste that's being cleaned up after an oil spill than your regular garbage. So what we're saying, there needs to be just, sustainable communities. Sustainability must deal with equity and social justice. It must deal with the fact that many of our families are below poverty and do not have a living wage. We have to address these legacy issues of inequality. So there's a framework for achieving environmental justice. Integrate environmental justice principles into decision making. Have equal access to green, healthy, and livable neighborhoods. Equal sharing of benefits and burden of development. Target pollution where hotspots are. And address climate change threats using justice and equity lens. And so on this Earth Month, we say, love the Earth. Thank you very much.